Okay, welcome to the art class online, the art class Bexley and the art class Wimbledon, to this talk on Pierre Bonnard, The Colour of Time. Pierre Bonnard is one of the great masters of the use of colour in modernism, in modernist painting. Bonnard was born in Paris and from a fairly well-to-do family, and I think it was initially intended that he go into one of the professions, something like law. This is what he looked like in older age, with his pet dog. This photograph was taken in his home in later years at a place called La Cannae in the south of France on the Côte d'Azur, but we'll discuss that later. But this is what Bonnard was like when he was young, quite a studious young man. I think his parents probably intended him to go into the law, but I think he fairly soon realized that he was much more interested in painting. So the young Bonnard as a painter, and I'll go through his early life fairly quickly. The young Bonnard as a painter basically was quite influenced by Japanese prints, which were very widely available in Paris at that time. In fact, they actually, I think, used to line the cases of tea chests. They were that readily available, and they started to have a very great influence on artists because of their decorative qualities, their flatness, and their sort of beautiful sense of aesthetic design. And this carried through into the work of the young Bonnard, who also made posters. So if any of you know the posters of Toulouse-Lautrec, if you look at poster art of the period, there is a wonderful kind of design sense and flatness of form. And you see that here in Bonnard. He's literally, in this case, of flattening the form of a dress into a pattern. And the dog itself makes another kind of flat pattern design. And the other woman is again really quite a flat pattern design. And Bonnard was not the only artist making art like this. Other artists like Maurice Denis, Denis, Edouard Vuillard, Vuillard, were making paintings in a similar vein, usually of everyday scenes of domestic interiors. And Bonnard and these other artists formed a group called Les Nabis. That's N-A-B-I-S, Nabis. And it was basically, it was sort of given the sort of the nickname of the Intimists, because their paintings were about very often about Parisian interiors, the domestic scene. And if we look at this painting here by Bonnard, this is a typical kind of intimist scene, painted in about sort of the very early 1900s, 1903, 1904. And it depicts Bonnard and his girlfriend, later to become his wife of many years, Marthe de Meligny. And it's an interesting painting in the sense that this sort of screen, this folding screen, literally virtually divides the picture plane between Bonnard and Marthe. And so compositionally, it just starts to give a hint of where where Bonnard's painting is going to go. That's to say, one of the characteristics of Bonnard's painting are his very, very original compositional ideas. But secondly, the most important aspect of the painting is these kind of very rich colors, these rich reds, greens that Bonnard is using. Obviously looking at how artificial light falling on Martha and the colors it's producing on her body, these sort of yellows and lilacs, and then the greens of the shadows. So it's kind of a sort of a sort of foretaste of where Bonnard's painting will develop. I'm going to just move on a bit. So he started painting, these quite domestic, intimate scenes of his wife Martha. They moved from Paris to a suburb of Paris up the Seine called Vernon, Vernon, and his paintings of this period were still kind of interested in, as you can see, pattern and design, but he's starting to actually give us a sense of where his interests are really developing, which is in terms of color. So the color palette here is fairly, I would almost describe it as sort of quite pastel-y, these sort of blues against these greens. But there is quite an interesting kind of division of the canvas between the darker colors, darker, warmer colors at the top, these oranges, yellows and browns, and the cooler colors, these blues and greens and sort of pastel-y pinks and greens, these jade greens down at the bottom. So in effect, he's dividing the canvas between warm colors at the top and cooler pastel-y tones at the bottom. And he's obviously very interested in the effects of light. Let's move on, just moving on. So here's another one of Martha, possibly still painted whilst they were in Paris. It looks like a Parisian apartment interior. Interesting composition. So the left-hand side of the painting is like in this sort of vertical of the wall, then to the dresser and the mirror, and to the dressing table, and then down to the tin bath. Then you have basically a central section of composition, which is the light coming in from the French windows. And then the third part of the composition on the right is Martha against the light. So you have these vertical rhythms running down the canvas. And then the whole of the right-hand side is illuminated by the light coming in from the window. And Martha is what is known as contre-jour. That means against the light. She's standing against the light. So we see her in silhouette, but he's obviously delineating or drawing attention to the way light falls on the shadow part of her body. So you see these lovely sort of blue, these sort of powder blue highlights of light, reflected light, because that's direct light coming to the front of her body from the window. But the light here on her back, that's all reflected light. So he's painted the reflected light, the highlights of the reflected light with sort of powder blue, and the actual shadow parts are mixtures of maroon, sort of tan color, really quite sort of subtly painted. But I suppose the interesting thing is this is still tonal painting, certainly in the case of Martha here. Still in the tonal world, okay. So I just want to say something about how his working process, because he lived with Martha for many, many years, and she was his main subject. He did obviously landscapes and still lifes, which we'll look at later, but she was a predominant subject. And Bonnard would basically form his paintings by initially doing very rapid sketches. He'd perhaps see Martha in the bath and do literally a sketch that will probably take no longer than about 4 or 5 minutes, just trying to capture the experience. And that's quite important in the case of Bonnard, because all his paintings are trying to recapture or recover lived experiences that he's had. So he would do these rapid sketches. He'd also take photographs. So here you see Martha sitting in I think this is once they've moved down to the south of France by the looks of the interior. I think this might be at Le Canet. Here's a photograph of her sitting down reading a magazine. So he would use photographic material in the paintings, but he'd also use drawings, his quick sketches. So here's a quick sketch. You can tell obviously that the two are related, and so he would use a combination of photography and quick sketches. The photography would actually recall the facticity of that moment, of that scene. The sketch would give Bonnard an idea of his experience of the scene. So photograph, fact, drawing, experience. Okay, and then what he'd do is he'd get these huge long rolls of canvas, and literally probably be about like 6 or 7 feet high, and he'd just unroll the canvas all the way along the wall for about 2 or 3 meters, maybe 10 feet or 12 feet. And then on this unbroken roll of canvas, he'd start like a number of paintings, okay? And once he'd got and he'd sort of like tend them each day, like a gardener tends his plants in the garden, okay? And then once he'd got the paintings, each of these individual little vignette type paintings, once he'd got them to a certain state of development, it's only then that he would like cut them up into separate individual paintings. I mean, they haven't been stretched over a stretcher yet, but you can see here that he's got these to the stage where they've been cut into individual canvases, but they didn't start life like that. They started as one unbroken canvas with basically different scenes in them. And this gave, the advantage that this gave him was that it enabled him to actually make cropping decisions and compositional decisions much later on in a painting. And he also, it also allowed him to sort of, look across to different paintings, like a gardener would look across at his sort of flower bed and decide, what colour to put next to what flower and so on. That's the way Bonnard's working practice developed in his sort of mature period. And we go down, we've got one more of him working in these. This is quite a late one because that's a late painting he did. And he's sort of like, just tending his garden of paintings, okay. And so that's the way this artist worked, quite steadily, not sensationally, the everyday practice of painting. And so this practice is how these paintings came into being. So Bonnard created a series of many paintings of Martha, and they were basically, as I say, conceived as sketches backed up by photographs, but it's only when he would actually start the paintings that he'd really start to think about the colour. So these are the first of, these are quite early studies. These may still have been painted when they were still in the north of France at Vernon. And so you can see how he's beginning to actually get a sense of colour is developing more as a sort of a quality that is to be sort of explored in its own right in his paintings. So, for example, in this painting, we have the first kind of real hint, I think, of where the tonal values in the painting, there are tonal values, that's true to say, but the tonal values are getting slightly closer. So because the tonal values are getting closer, that means to say we tend to focus more on the colour relationships, the warm yellows to the cool blues, the warmish kind of like sandy dusk tones to these lighter creams. And our focus, we tend to read the painting more as a colour painting than we do as a tonal painting. And this is true of this one, because if you look at Martha's body here, the tonal difference between her body and the wall behind her is not that great. There is a tonal difference, but it's brought out, you know, by the way he's using these sort of violets in the penumbra of the shadow of Martha's body. So you've got direct light here, which is falling on her upper torso, and then you've got the reflected light on her back, which is the light coming from the wall here. So, and that's so like her back was originally this yellow color basically, and then he's kind of modulated the back with reflected light, which is a mixture of whites and I think quite cool blues and lilacs. So you get those highlights there. And then this kind of this shadow area here, which the shadow itself is also receiving reflected light. So the deepest part of the shadow is like a sort of maroony lilac, like there and there and there. But then that's overlaid with these sort of lighter lilacs and pinks, okay? So the tonal difference between all this is very, very small, okay? And that means that we're starting to read the painting as colour, because the way it works visually is that if you have like a big tonal jump, like from that dark door frame to the light of the window, we read that part of the painting in terms of light and dark, okay? But where you have tonalities that are closer in tonal value, we start to read the painting on the other register of colour, that's to say cool and warm colours, okay? And we start to read it chromatically, and we start to read it not just in terms of cool and warm colours, but in terms of complementary colours, lilacs to yellow, sort of, you know, reds to greens, oranges to blues. And so we open up a whole new way of experiencing the world through colour, not through tonality, not through the register of black to white, but through the register of cool to warm and complementary colours. So Bonnard moves to the south of France with Martha and occupies a house at Le Canet, which is on the Côte d'Azur. And I think you can see now what happens when he gets down to Le Canet, these sensational iridescent light of the south of France as it basically bathes their bathroom. And so this painting of Martha in the bath is just a jewel of colour, and he is now literally using colour chromatically. There is no tonal painting in this colour whatsoever, apart from the little dog, Martha's little pet dog. That's the only real tonal jump. The rest of it is just this gorgeous, iridescent sort of delight in the relationship between colours. And so just to examine it, Martha's body is almost at a same tonal value as the bath that she's occupying, okay? But what he's doing is, the reason we're able to actually distinguish Martha, he's playing off cool and warm colours. So Martha's body has these sort of warmish violets in them, and then he's juxtaposing that with the cooler greens, and then the cooler greens are adjacent to the warmer oranges, and the warmer oranges are adjacent to, they're complementary of the cooler blue, and then we go to these sort of lilac-y blues, and so blue to orange, complementaries, yellows to violets, complementaries. He extends the violet through its other range of, if you take violet and you add more and more blue to it, you start to get into the blue register. So blues, and within these tiles, there are other colours as well operating, like reds and pinks. And then, you know, the underside of the bath, which is receiving reflected light, is just this glorious passage of these yellows, greens, oranges, and then this sort of turquoisey, but it's not just one tone of turquoisey green. He's got ceruleans in there. He's got viridian greens in there. He's got some lilacs in there. He's got sap greens. There's probably, just in that area of green, there's probably about 8 or 9 colours at operation there. Okay, and that gives our eyes this richness. The tiles, you know, these warm yellows, dabs of colour against these sort of powder blues, and then he transitions it to the pinks, and the pinks start climbing up the wall. Pinks, and how do you extend the pink? You take it into the orange register of colour, still keeping the same tonal equivalence, and then you extend it into the yellow register of colour, still roughly within the same, although it's lighter, the same tonal equivalence, but he's breaking up the yellow with oranges. So, I mean, there is this immense richness to chromatic painting. Here's another one of Martha in the bathroom. Compositionally, I mean, this one, you know, Martha's almost, I mean, floating in this iridescence. She's held aloft by this sort of enveloping light that's surrounding and sort of inhabiting the bathroom, and she's suspended in this bath of just pure iridescent light. And the reason this talk is titled "The Colour of Time," in this sort of recreation, I mean, Bonnard has seen Martha in the bath one morning, and the light coming in obviously had such an effect on him. But his question is, how do I recreate the intensity of that experience? And so he kind of, he's not, if he had taken a photograph and just literally worked objectively from a photograph, the painting would have come out totally different. It would have been a much more factual, objective image of Martha in the bath. This painting is not about objective reality. What Bonnard is trying to do in his paintings here, he's actually trying to recreate the experience that he had on that particular morning, in that moment of seeing Martha in the bath. So all his efforts in all his paintings in the later period of his life are about trying to recuperate lived experience. And very often in doing that, the artist intensifies, because the intensity of the experience that the artist had, in this case Bonnard, he needs to find an equivalence in the intensity of that experience, and he finds it in the use of colour. And so, you know, objectively, if you'd walked into the bathroom that morning, it would have been obviously very bright, but you would not have had that same experience, because this is Bonnard's experience, and this is the experience that he's communicating in his paintings. Likewise, this was Bonnard's experience when he saw Martha bending down, having got out of the bath. And another exquisite painting where again, chromatic, the tonalities are, there's an equivalence of tonalities, but the painting is read through the relationship of colours, warm and cool colours, complementary colours, and, you know, this beautiful composition, which is sort of, you know, divided into various zones almost. Now, here's an interesting one. This is quite clearly where I think Bonnard has taken a photograph, because it's cropped. He's using the cropping device that photography uses, and Martha's body here is like right up against the picture plane. We're very close to Martha here, and there's this incredible immediacy to this image. So he's basically this is a bit more of the tonalities involved in this, but Martha's body has been painted in this sort of because she's, as it were, against the light, because the light is all behind her. He's painted her body initially in a kind of reddy violet, the whole body, because it's in silhouette, and then he's overlaid it with oranges over this deep reddy violet. And then what has he done? I mean, you know, you'd think that you would want to use like a sort of cool blue, but no, he's not done anything quite as obvious as that. He's actually used this really kind of similar tonal equivalence of this sort of violet, this warm violet, which is interspersed here and there with bits of cooler lilac and blue. But it's created this incredible, intoxicating light, the reflected light in the shadow area of her body. Look at those lilacs up there against these oranges. And then in the part of her body that's receiving the direct light, these lemon yellows and cooler lemons. So the direct light is cooler colours, lemons and cadmium yellows and whites and so on. And the shadow part of her body is in the warmer tonalities. Bonnard made landscape paintings in the south of France. This is Le Canet, I think probably the view from the terrace of his house. And he's looking across at the Alpes Maritime. But again, you squint your eyes, virtually no tonal difference in that painting. It's all done through colour. And even the larger areas of colour, they're not just flatly painted, they're interspersed with other smaller broken bits of colour. Another landscape from Le Canet, virtually a similar viewpoint between the two. This time I would imagine either it looks possibly early morning or late in the evening. Incredible, you know, beautiful colour relationships. That blue really sings against the orange. and the bluey violet of the Alpes-Maritimes against that sort of you know, chrome acidic yellow of the sky. Absolutely fabulous. He did paintings of interiors. This may still be Vernon, actually, looking at the, but again, very tonal equivalence throughout, you know, very little tonal difference in this, but it's all done through color, the relationships of color. And we're going to just start to really look at some still lifes now, which is really where he gets very, very rich with the color. So compositionally, like, he sticks this still life right at the front of the picture plane, and it's the artificial light is casting the violet shadows, violet to yellow complementaries, warm against cool colors, the blues to the reds, sensational. And here, I mean, I think we've looked previously at Matisse's Red Studio. This is a kind of nod in that direction. Matisse and Bonnard were companions on the Côte d'Azur, but he's literally bathing this whole part of the table in redness. And then he's using these other colours, the yellows going against the lighter blues and oranges of the background. I'm just a bit wary of the time, we're running out. Again, these baskets of fruit, complementary colours operating, warms and cools, but floating in a sea of alizarin red and violets. And, you know, all the time he's trying to recreate these experiences. The grapes in this basket with the wall beyond illuminated in this, I would imagine, end of day intense warm light that is extracting from the yellows, the oranges, the greens, the blue, the blues and the whites that he's juxtaposing, you know, cool against warm colours, violets against yellows. One more here. I mean, it literally shimmers. The light is so intense with these lilacs, and how he's transitioning them to violets, and then the way he's using not just whites, but whites with blues, whites with pinks, and then we get into the real fruit, which are the yellows, cold yellows, warm reds and tans, lovely orange to the warm orange to the cool yellow there. This is extraordinary. The composition, large area of red, but broken up with alizarins and violets, like pinky violets within the reds, and then the large areas of yellow, which are again modulated. I want to just finish on his late self-portraits. So again, Marthe has died by this time, and he's just really studying himself. And the very last one that he painted, where he's bathed in this yellow light, and possibly painted from life in the mirror. And he's still wonderfully sort of capturing this sort of yellow light, perhaps an artificial light that he's looking at himself in the mirror with, and just a wonderful summation to how colour can be dealt with chromatically rather than